All right, it is now afternoon, so good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Jason Haremza. I'm a planner with Genesee Finger Lakes Regional Planning Council. I'm joined by two of my colleagues today, Rob Richardson and Jenny Lowenstein, as well as our partners, Shannon Bellamy and Robin Wilt. And I'll let them all introduce themselves more completely. I'm just going to go over a few logistical items before we begin, and then we will start the presentation. As with all of our presentations, this is being recorded, and barring any technical difficulties, we will be posting this in the next few weeks on GFL's YouTube channel for anybody that was not able to attend today. We do ask that people remain muted during the presentation. We will have plenty of time for questions and discussion at various points today. Feel free to use the chat room function at any time, though. I'll be monitoring that during the presentations, and we can come back to folks' questions. If you are a local government official, planning board, zoning board member, and you are here for training credit hours, please make sure your full name is visible as a participant, or send me a message in the chat room or an email so we can be sure and verify your attendance and you get credit for your training hours. With that, I believe that is all my logistical details. Thank you so much for participating today. We're glad you could all be here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shannon Bellamy.
Hello, thank you. I'm going to share my screen really quickly. There we go. All right, can everyone see that, I think? Great. All right, well, hello, everyone. I am Shannon Bellamy. I work for Rocktricity, and we are a local program manager for community choice aggregation programs here in the region. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about community choice aggregation and what it is and what that means for your municipality. So first, I thought I would start by talking a little bit about who I am and what we do. So my company that I work for, Rocktricity, is partnered with Jewel Community Power, and Jewel is a CCA program administrator that is authorized by the state to do this work. So they work with municipalities to obtain renewable energy supply contracts and help to manage the overall programs. And then here what we do is we are a local program manager for them. So we're more on the ground and can help with community outreach and education. And we're based in Rochester. So the communities that I currently help to manage their CCA programs are those here. So Rochester Community Power, Monroe Community Power, Finger Lakes Community Choice, and Gateway Community Power are 4 community choice aggregation programs in this area that I help to manage. And then here in the boxes, you can see which municipalities have moved forward with active community choice aggregation programs. So Rochester, the town of Brighton, town of Geneva, villages of Brockport and Lima, village of Victor, and the city of Canandaigua. There are more in the region. These are just the only ones that, or these are the ones that I work with currently that have active live programs. So today I thought I would start by talking a little bit about electricity and electric bills, just because I think it's important that we all review so that we're on the same page. Next, I'll talk about community choice aggregation and what it is and what all it entails, as well as the 2 most common offerings associated with community choice aggregation, and then talk about enrollment and eligibility and the next steps that you can take if you're interested in implementing this in your own community. So first, let's get a big picture look. So here's how our electricity works, the flow of electricity. So you have electricity suppliers and brokers, which generate and provide the electricity to the utility grid. And then the utility takes that electricity and sends it to the customers, okay? When you pay your bill, though, it's not as straightforward. So you pay 2 different sections. You pay first for electricity delivery, and then you also pay for electricity supply. It's on the same bill, but there are 2 different components. So that delivery charge goes straight to the utilities and they keep that, but the electricity supply part is actually remitted back to the suppliers or the brokers for the actual electricity that they produced. So then looking at a bill, this is an example of just a basic electricity bill that you probably recognize. And then you see those two same components. You see the delivery services, and then you see the supply services as well. So these delivery services have a variety of different charges. So what you're paying here is you're paying to be a utility customer. You're paying to use the grid, you're paying to get your bills, you're paying to ensure that you have consistent, reliable electricity. Those charges will always be there. That's just part of having electricity here in the state. But the part that you do have control over is this electricity supply services section here at the bottom. And so for this, there are a few different things. There is electricity supply, which is the actual electricity you use. And then there's a few other charges, the most important being the merchant function charge. You can see it's typically a small portion of the bill, but this is what you actually currently pay the utility to purchase electricity on your behalf. So that's what you are paying for currently, but this section actually changes once you adopt a community choice aggregation program. And I'll show you a little bit more about that in a minute, but that's the basic how the charges are broken down, just so we understand that part. So then this is the big picture without community choice. This is how things work right now for most communities. You receive electricity, you pay it in those ways, with a large portion of it coming from fossil fuels and or nuclear, with a little bit of renewables here in the state. With community choice, we hope to add the addition of renewably generated electricity and help to minimize that fossil fuel use. So that's kind of what we're aiming for here. But so what is community choice aggregation? So community choice aggregation, also known as CCA, which is what I'll refer to it as here on out, is a policy enabling municipalities to determine default energy offerings, including electricity supply and community solar, on the behalf of its residents and small businesses. So let's break that down a little bit. A policy enabling municipalities. So in this context, municipality is city, town, or villages, but it would be the smallest form of local government. So if you have a village, it would be on the village line, and then you'd kind of go up. So it has to be at the smallest level. And then it's enabled through a general municipal law. So you'd pass a local law enabling yourselves to do CCA. And all of these programs are regulated by the Public Service Commission. To determine default energy offerings. So currently, the local utility in the state sets the default. When you sign up for electricity, you just get the default electricity, which, as we remember from the diagram, just means that we're paying the utility to select electricity for us. They basically just go out to the market, they get whatever's at the market, and then they remit those payments or the rate directly back to you. And then community choice allows local decision-making over the default offering. So instead of just doing whatever the utility has set, we're allowed to make our own decisions to determine what we want the default electricity to be in our communities. And so by switching the default, this means that everyone who's eligible is automatically switched over unless they choose not to participate. So they have opportunities to leave or not to participate, but it does make it the new default. So including electricity supply and community choice solar. So these are the two different components of community choice aggregation. The most important one, or the one that's most common right now in the state, is electricity supply, which directs the purchase of the electricity you consume from the default to the utility to a new selected supplier that the municipality selects. And then community solar, which instructs the utility to purchase solar generated electricity in the amount that you consume. And in return, you actually receive savings in the form of bill credits on your electricity bill, which of course supports local solar and renewable generation. And we'll talk about both of these components here in a little bit, but that's the main overview of what this is offering the residents. And then on behalf of residents and small businesses. So those are the two groups that are automatically included, more specifically SC1 and SC2 meter types, but most small businesses and residents. And then of course the eligibility differs a little bit by community choice elements. So there's different automatic enrollment for supply and solar, but we'll get to that in a second. But then once again, it is community choice. Everyone has the opportunity or option to participate or not. There is no fees or penalties for opting out or opting in. It is completely up to the residents. This is just another option that they have. Okay, so that's the overview for CCA. But now let's talk a little bit more about the exact offerings and what this means for the community. So first, community choice supply. So this is the most common one that you see right now. In this case, the CCA administrator would help the municipality to obtain a fixed rate renewable energy contract with electricity suppliers. So the CCA administrator would sit down with the municipality and decide what the municipality wants to offer their residents as the new default. So what percent of renewable supply do they want? Are they aiming for 100% renewable, or do they just want a fixed rate standard fossil fuel mix? How long do they want the program to go? And what rate are they willing to offer their residents? What will they accept when the contracts come back? The most common one that we see is for 100% renewable as the default, which is great. And then the fixed rate for 24 months. It doesn't have to be 24 months, but that tends to be the sweet spot for pricing, where you can lock in a really good rate and not have to worry too much long term. And then again, this becomes the default offering. So this is now what new residents in your community would be automatically enrolled to, unless they choose to go back to the utility or select their own supplier. So then again, looking at the bill, it's important to note that this does impact the electricity bills and what residents see. So it's going to impact that supply section of the bill down at the bottom. And it changes from the utility. So instead of the utility charging you to go and select or purchase energy on your behalf, instead, this whole section is taken out and replaced by an additional page onto the bill, typically the last page, which includes information from the new supplier that the municipality selected, and has the fixed rate and the name of the new supplier. So typically there's a message from the new supplier saying thank you or explaining any charges and things like that. And then you see the fixed rate. So right here, we see this customer used 518 kilowatt hours of electricity, and the rate at which they were charged is about 4.3 cents per kilowatt hour. So this is actually the rate that we have in the town of Brighton, for example, right now. So this customer knows that every single month that they're a part of the program, they will be charged that exact same rate, that 4.292 cents per kilowatt hour, every single month. So instead of guessing as to what their bill is going to be, they at least know where their electricity is coming from and how much they're going to be charged the rate for it. Okay, so that's the only change that people see. But there are a lot of benefits. So first, the reduced electric rates for residents and small businesses compared to individual retail products. So in the state, supply is still a choice. Everyone can choose whether or not they want to go through the utilities default or select a third-party electricity supplier, which is also known as an ESCO. Anyone can choose that, but currently in the state, if you're looking to get 100% renewable electricity at a fixed rate for a long-term fixed rate, it's going to be fairly expensive. There's not a lot of affordable options right now. So by utilizing a bulk purchasing strategy, which is what this does, we're able to kind of lock in at a lower rate than people would pay individually. Next, reduce price volatility through fixed rate and longer term contracts. So if you look at this little diagram on the left, you can see that the electricity market is highly variable. So when the utility is purchasing your electricity supply, they purchase it at whatever it's available at the market at that point in time. So you don't know what you're paying until your bill shows up. Whereas with the CCA, you're locked in at a fixed rate. So it kind of helps avoid that price volatility. And if you get in ahead of time, then you're able to secure a lower rate, which tends to remain consistently lower than the utility. Additionally, it also helps to accelerate the transition to renewable energy and encourages local renewable energy development and jobs, which is very important as well. And then one of the biggest benefits of community choice supply also is access to clean energy communities funding. So implementing a CCA with community solar provides access to NYSERDA's Clean Energy Communities grant funding, which will be talked about later in this presentation. But it's important to note that in order to be considered for this, you have to select 100% renewable default. to get those points. So here's an example on the left of one of our communities, Brighton, which if you look down here has received 1,500 points for implementing community choice aggregation. So they're making their way to being eligible for some of those grants. And then we'll have more information on that later. But so that's the electricity supply section. Next is community choice solar. So this is a newer component of community choice aggregation. There's actually only a few administrators that are currently authorized to do this, just because it is newer and there's several kind of like regulations that you have to go through to be authorized. But this is a really cool and exciting new component that offers guaranteed savings. So for community choice solar, the CCA administrator helps the municipality obtain contracts with the solar farms or developers. And so participants in the program receive savings off of their monthly electricity bill in the form of solar credits, and these are guaranteed savings. So how that works is that the solar farm generates clean electricity and puts it onto the utility grid. And then those who are assigned to the farm or participating in the program receive those credits on their bill each month in the form of savings. And then over the course of the year, participants are guaranteed to save 8 to 10% off of their annual electricity bill. And like electricity supply, when this program launches, it is also on an opt-out basis, meaning all those that are eligible are automatically included unless they'd like to opt out. So once assigned to the farm, they start seeing those savings on their bill. So here's an example of a utility bill. And you see here at the bottom, there's that miscellaneous charges section. Typically, it's very small. Typically, you only pay a few cents each month. But with community solar, you start seeing large savings in the form of solar credits. So here, if we zoom in a little bit, you see CDG value stack credit. And then this customer saved almost $122. So CDG stands for Community Distributed Generation, just another term of community solar. But this is what participants would start seeing on their normal utility bills each month, is various levels of credits just taken off of their electricity bill. Okay, so aside from the guaranteed savings, there's also additional benefits to community solar. But first of all, it's important to note that most New York homes can't implement solar panels on their own property. Either they don't have the correct infrastructure, they don't get enough sunlight, there's a variety of reasons. But community solar allows residents and small businesses to benefit from community solar and help promote renewable energy generation without having to deal with the hassle and huge upfront costs of providing their own solar panels. So in addition to that guaranteed savings, there's also nothing to install. So no panels, no installation, no maintenance costs. Additionally, you don't have to pay to sign up or to exit the program. And of course, it supports the development of clean and renewable energy. So one second. Who will be automatically included? So that's a really important question when thinking about implementing this for your municipality or community. So the most important thing to remember here is that it is the customer's choice. Although this operates on an opt-out basis, everyone has a decision to make, and it is completely up to them what they participate in. They could do both of those offerings, they could select one, or they could do neither. It's completely up to them, and they can change their enrollment at any time. But then when it comes to that automatic enrollment, it's important to know who that includes. So residents and small businesses that have a utility account, so it goes by their utility account, will be automatically enrolled as long as they live in the municipality and don't have a block on their utility account. And then for the individual components, there's slightly different eligibility. So for community supply or community choice electricity supply, they cannot have already selected a third-party supplier or an ESCO. If you've already made that decision for yourself, this will not cancel that out. You'll remain with who you've selected. You can choose to leave your ESCO to join the program, but that's up to you. And you also, unfortunately, cannot be participating in a utility assistance program, such as HEAP. That one is unfortunate, but based on state regulations, you can't include HEAP or other assistance participants in this program unless there's guaranteed savings And because the utility rate is variable, we cannot guarantee from month to month that the rate is always going to be cheaper. But the good news is the community choice solar does have guaranteed savings. So for that one, the only thing that would hinder automatic enrollment would be if you already have solar on your property, or if you're already participating in a community solar project or program. So you can only benefit from community solar or from solar in one way. But aside from that, everyone else is set to be automatically included when these programs launch. Okay, so there is a little bit of a need to act quickly here. So for community solar, access to existing or almost completed farms or project is limited. There's a big demand for solar, but there's not that many that are actually ready or in the works. So getting a contract with a solar farm or solar developer set up early is a benefit if you're looking to help your residents save money. Additionally, access to the funding through the Clean Energy Communities grants, that's first come, first serve. So the sooner you get these programs in place, the sooner you can help be eligible for that funding. And then there's also additional sustainability funds through different programs or CCA administrators that offer additional funds for those who participate in community solar projects. And then for supply, much like the natural gas market, if any of you have been following that, the future markets do look like they're trending up for electricity supply. So the sooner you can lock in a fixed rate, the more likely it is that you'll have savings for your residents with the electricity supply portion. And then so let's talk a little bit about the next steps if you're interested in implementing these programs for your community. The work for the municipality really isn't much. So first, what you'd need to do is pass a local law enabling your own entity to go forward with community choice aggregation. And most CCA administrators have templates that they can provide for this. So again, not a lot of work there. Then you can select a CCA administrator. There's no cost to the municipality to have an administrator. So it is up to you whether or not you'd want to do an RFP, or you can just do interviews. You can select them however you'd like, but most of them are more than happy to provide a description of their program offerings or their implementation plans and things like that. And then finally, you'd need to pass a resolution outlining the program. After that, everything is up to the CCA administrator. So they're the ones that would file the program with the state. They would do all of the education and outreach, which is what I at Rocktricity helped to do. Then they'd also issue the RFP for the supply and negotiate community solar offerings, as well as doing all of the contract and pricing details. And finally, they facilitate the program launch, which includes notifying everyone, making sure all the accounts are properly enrolled and switched over. And then finally, everything that has to do with maintaining and sustaining the program. So that includes also a call center and emails, websites, social media management, everything that you'd need to run a program and have your community understand it and feel comfortable with it and have someone to call if they have questions. That's all up to the CCA administrator. So then a quick review really quickly. So CCA is a tool to allow municipalities to access cleaner, more affordable electricity. It has two offerings, electricity supply and community solar. It is up to the community to choose. So residents choose whether or not they want to participate, completely up to them. There are no fees to the municipality or the residents to participate in a program. There's no costs associated with it. And finally, don't wait. If you are at all interested in exploring these options, it is important to act now because prices are rising, community solar is being taken up. You definitely want to be ahead of the crowd when it comes to implementing these programs. But thank you very much. I hope this was educational. If you have any questions about these programs or are interested in bringing them to your community, feel free to reach out to me or any of my team at Rocktricity. We are more than happy to come out and give presentations to local town boards or committees or anything that you need to help introduce this topic to your community. Thank you.
Great, Shannon. Thank you so much for sharing your time and all that information. Are there any questions at this point while we transition to to our next session. CCA sounds like a no-brainer. What's the catch? I don't know myself. I don't know if Shannon, you want to weigh in on that, or maybe Jenny or Rob, you'll speak to that in our upcoming sections.
Yeah, I mean, the one answer I have for that right now is there is risk involved with any type of change. So you're switching the default for your community from what the utility that they've known for generations to a new supplier, and that involves risks, specifically a little bit of political risk. So I would say don't move forward with CCA unless you're dedicated to the environmental impacts. Really, like, you really have to be in it for the impacts, not just the savings, because it is a change.
Great, thank you. All right, Jenny, are we ready to go?
I think we're ready, as long as everyone can hear me okay?
I can hear you, yes.
Perfect.
So I'm going to mute myself, and let's keep our fingers crossed the technology works. But Jenny, take it away.
All right, thank you so much. And thank you, Shannon. That was a really great overview of what community choice aggregation is. It can feel a little daunting and a little complicated, but that was such a great presentation, just breaking down what it is and the process of going through with it. So my name is Jenny Lowenstein, and I'm a planner here with Genesee Finger Lakes Regional Planning Council. And I'm going to provide you with an overview of the Clean Energy Communities and Climate Smart Communities programs and how community choice aggregation can support your community's goals of climate resiliency and affordability, all while becoming recognized as a climate leader and receiving grant funding for future work through these programs. Next slide, please. So a little bit about me before we start diving in. My name is Jenny, and I'm a planner with the Genesee Finger Lakes Regional Planning Council. I grew up near Albany, New York, to parents who were engineers and planners. So understanding how communities and spaces function and environmental sustainability have always been of interest to me. I attended SUNY Environmental Science and Forestry in Syracuse, getting my undergraduate degree in landscape architecture, and later moved to Boston and got my master's degree in urban affairs. After being out of state in Boston and in Seattle, working for consulting firms, local governments, and nonprofits, my partner and I moved back to Rochester, where he is from originally, and decided to continue our careers here. And that's how I landed here at GFL RPC, working on these programs and working with our really amazing communities on this type of work. So that's enough about me. Jason, go to the next slide. Thank you. So the Clean Energy Communities Program is a funded program through NYSERDA. It has $17 million in grant funding for communities, as well as step-by-step guidance and leadership recognition. The goal of the program is to help municipalities in the state save money and shrink their carbon footprint, all while meeting the Climate Act goals. In the first round of this program, and today in the second round of the program, the Genesee Finger Lakes region has remained a leader in this program. We have 78 participating communities, 40 designated communities, and 246 actions that have been completed. And that was last week when I was working on this presentation. I think a few more participating communities and actions have been completed since then, which is really exciting. Our region is really moving in this climate work. Next slide, please. So in the Clean Energy Communities program, there are 4 different grant opportunities. The first is a designation grant. A community completes any 4 high impact actions, they submit them to NYSERDA, and they receive a one-time grant award of $5,000. There's points-based grants. As communities complete high impact actions, they accumulate points to unlock additional match-free grant funding. Communities will receive funding when they hit the 3,000, 4,000, and the 5,000 point thresholds. There's also action grants. There are 2 high impact actions that qualify for this grant type, New York Stretch Code, as well as community campaigns, and those will earn your community additional funding. There's also a disadvantaged communities bonus grant. if your community is a NYSERDA disadvantaged community, any points-based or action grant of $20,000 or more are automatically eligible for an additional $10,000 award. And I think, as Shannon mentioned, it's important to note that all of these grants are first come, first served. So, as our communities are moving through these programs, we like to make sure that no one is running or sprinting through the community through this program, but you are very aware that these action grants and points-based grants are moving. And any of these grants can be used towards any green energy project within the municipality or anything that can demonstrate the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide. So this is a full list of the high impact actions in the program. Each one has a varying point total based on the difficulty and the environmental impact. Points range from 200 for something like the Unified Solar Permit or Energy Code Enforcement Training, up to 800 points for being a climate smart community, and all the way up to 2,000 points for community choice aggregation. And as you can see, community choice aggregation has one of the biggest environmental impacts in it. You get the highest point total for completing that action. Next slide. So what is the Climate Smart Communities program? There's a lot of overlap between this program and the program I just talked about, especially since Climate Smart Communities certification is one of the high impact action items for the CEC program. Climate Smart Communities is a program that's jointly sponsored by DEC, NYSERDA, DPS, the Department of State, the DOT, Department of Health, and also by NYPA. There are over 100 climate mitigation and adaptation measures a community can take, earning them points towards certification. The Climate Smart Communities program is more broad thinking about a community as a system and how to reach the sustainability goals, looking at things like transportation networks, energy upgrades, and water resources planning. Communities can become bronze or silver certified by completing actions which will open up CFA funding for future green energy projects. Within the Genesee Finger Lakes region, we have 24 registered communities. These are communities that have taken the pledge to be climate smart. We also have 4 bronze certified communities: the City of Rochester, the Town of Brighton, City of Canandaigua, and the City of Geneva. Next slide, please. So this is a very short list of some of the actions that are available to a community in the Climate Smart Communities program. As I mentioned, there's over 100, but all of these actions listed here are the ones that will get you credit in both the Climate Smart and the Clean Energy Communities programs, including community choice aggregation. So here at Genesee Finger Lakes, we're happy to work with any community in either the CEC or CSC programs to maximize each program and achieve grant funding and recognition, especially if you're considering or have completed community choice aggregation. Next slide. So as Shannon mentioned, community choice aggregation is pooling your community's buying power for better price on renewable energy sources. Community choice aggregation is an action item in both of the CEC and CSC communities. And the community choice aggregation will gain your community's high point totals in both of these programs due to its significant impact. In the Clean Energy Communities program, community choice aggregation is required to be an opt-out program, which means all residents are part of this program until they no longer want to be, and they can opt out at any time. Community choice aggregation also needs to be 100% renewable supply mix, and this will gain your community 1,500 points. If your community decides to include opt-out community solar, you will gain your community an additional 500 points. All in community choice aggregation in the Clean Energy Communities program will gain your community 2,000 points, which means you're only 1,000 points away from the first points-based grant amount, which can range from $10,000 to $30,000 in grant funding, depending on the size of your community. In the Climate Smart Communities program, community choice aggregation is also required to be 100% renewable default supply mix. This will gain your community between 15 and 21 points based off of your population size. And your community can also gain an additional 12 points for opt-out community solar as well. These points will support your community submission to becoming bronze or silver certified. Next slide. Jason, can I have the next slide, please?
Bear with us just a second.
Not a problem.
Oh,
Perfect.
okay, there we go.
Thank you. So how can we help your community at Genesee Finger Lakes Regional Planning Council? So we can connect you to communities who have already enacted CCA or considering enacting CCA. By doing this, you can join forces with an even larger aggregation to make your buying power even stronger. We can also help you select a third-party administrator, provide template legislation and other supporting documentation. And also we can come to board meetings, council meetings to present this information as well. I think most importantly, we can also support the education and community outreach component that CCA so desperately needs to teach the community about what community choice aggregation is, what it means, and how it can support economic and environmental sustainability within a community. Also, we're here to make sure you take advantage of both the Clean Energy Communities and Climate Smart Communities programs, and make sure you're really seeing the overlap between the two and maximizing your grant funding opportunities. Next slide. So please reach out to Rob or myself here at Genesee Finger Lakes Regional Planning Council, and we can walk your community through the best path forward in both of these programs, and also support your efforts in getting CCA enacted in your community. So now I'm going to turn it over to Rob, who's going to discuss CCA implementation from a municipal administration perspective.
Okay, while we do this transition here, bear with us. Feel free to put questions in the chat room, and Shannon, Jenny, or Rob, if any questions come up, feel free to field those while I get the next presentation teed up here.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jason.
All right. Yep. Take it away, Rob.
All right. My name is Rob Richardson, and I am the Clean Energy Communities Coordinator for the Genesee Finger Lakes region. And as Jenny did an excellent job of explaining, it is a big part of the Clean Energy Communities program. Today, I'm going to wear a little bit of a different hat, though. In my prior career, before coming to Genesee Finger Lakes, I actually served as the Assistant City Manager in the city of Canandaigua, which was, as discussed, is a CCA community, and help walk them through that process. So today I'm going to talk about what my experience was as a municipal staff member and how the process looked from our end. Next slide, please. Before we do that, though, just quick introductions. My background is not actually in planning. It is in municipal management. I have a bachelor's in politics and government and an MPA in public management and public policy. Why that's important is pretty much as soon as I finished grad school, I was hired to be the assistant city manager in the city of Canandaigua. Amazing opportunity, a wonderful community, so much so that we bought a house there. But one of the things that happened in my early months was I was given the city's environmental initiatives and tasked with bringing the city as far as I possibly could on their sustainability goals. So two of the things that I accomplished in my tenure with the city was both the CEC designation as well as a climate smart community certification for the city of Canandaigua, which are two things that I'm still extremely proud of. But ultimately, it was my favorite part of the job. And when I had the opportunity to go do that work with 188 communities across our 9 counties, for me, it was just an opportunity that was too good to pass up. So that's how I ended up at Genesee Finger Lakes in this position. And that's enough about me. But you know, the one thing that I'd really like to point out is that I'm coming at this from multiple perspectives because I'm also a homeowner in the city of Canandaigua that enjoys the benefits of the CCA program that's in place. Next slide, please. Shannon did an absolutely fantastic job of breaking down community choice aggregation, so I'm not gonna steal her thunder or repeat what she said. But the one thing that I do want to share here is this slide shows what's a traditional average mix for the power supply in the city of Rochester. So as you can see, we have some renewables there and nuclear and hydro and other renewables like solar and wind, but we still have a large component, almost a third, being generated using fossil fuels. Next slide, please. So the goal of community choice aggregation isn't only just to give that power back to the communities and give their residents and small businesses the ability to choose. It's also to try and eliminate fossil fuels from electricity generation. We know that by 2040, New York State's Climate Act has codified that all energy in New York State needs to come from renewable sources. So community choice aggregation is a program that your municipality can explore that'll set your community up for some of these transitions that are coming. Next slide, please. So a little bit of background on how I first got exposed to community choice aggregation. As I mentioned, I was tasked with the city's environmental initiatives, and one of those was to take the city as far as we could go in the Clean Energy Communities program. And the original version of the CCA was a part of that program, but there was a couple of things that were holdups for us. Number one was there was a heavy administrative burden on staff. So we had several departments, in particular departments that would be processing and working with this type of project that were running short-staffed. And we knew that bringing in another large process and responsibility might be a backbreaker for them. So, right away, we kind of dismissed it as something that we couldn't do. There was also the concern that we couldn't be guaranteed a 100% renewable supply. A little bit about the city of Canandaigua. For those that aren't familiar, is we sit on the north shore of a beautiful lake. There's not only an economic development and tourism driver, but also provides drinking water to tens of thousands of people in our region. So the city traditionally has been very forward thinking in terms of its environmental policies. And the general feeling was that, if we were going to make a decision like this, because it is a big decision, we were only going to do it if the 100% renewable was the option that we were provided. As Shannon mentioned, there's also the inability in the early rounds of this program to guarantee savings for residents. As she showed on that graph, electricity is a commodity that fluctuates, and it can go up and down and can be extremely volatile. We're actually coming off of the all-time low of the electric commodity, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few slides. But there's a municipal management saying that no matter how much sense SENSE something makes, it still needs to make sense CENTS. So, no matter how much we wanted to move to 100% renewable supply, we also had to make sure that it was going to be good for the residents in our community and that we weren't going to be exposing them to, potentially huge increases in their energy supply bills. In general, the task also just seemed very overwhelming. There's about 11,000 people that live in the city of Canandaigua. How are we potentially going to reach all of these people? How are we going to frame this as a good idea? Is this even something we really have the right to do? Or is this potentially overreach on our part? How are we going to get the right messaging to the community in a way that's effective? If I'm being honest, a lot of the concerns that we had, I think were based on assumptions on the way that people had reacted on other past large initiatives. And we psyched ourselves out a little bit. That said, it wasn't something that we completely walked away from, and we kind of continued to keep it in the back of our minds. And then the Public Service Commission added a game-changing component to this program that made it approachable for us. Next slide, please. And that was the addition of the third-party administrator. We had continued to bounce around the idea of pursuing community choice aggregation even after we'd initially passed. And a few months after we'd initially decided we weren't going to move forward, Rocktricity reached out to us and said, hey, we know that this is something you've been interested in the past. Do you know that you can now use a third-party administrator to help you run this program? And that for us changed the conversation immediately. Shannon did a great job of explaining all the benefits that the third-party administrator brings to the table and all the incredible services that they provide. And that for us gave us the comfort to know that we could move forward with this initiative without having to worry about how it was going to impact staff, which was not only something that our staff was happy about, but also our elected officials, knowing that we weren't going to be overburdening the people providing services. I can't overstate the importance of the third-party administrator enough. Not only do they handle the Public Service Commission and all the business end of things, they're also your forward face for the community and the educational component and that outreach campaign. So as you go through this process and you decide who you want to select and who you want to work with, make sure you ask the right questions. Make sure that the company that you're working with, the potential administrator that you're working with, matches the values of your community and appreciates where you're coming from and is going to be able to mirror not just the intent of administration, but also capture why it's important for the community to participate. Next slide, please. So this is how the process with the city of Canandaigua went. In 2018, this was after we'd heard back from Richardson and we knew that the third-party administration option was there for us. We started to explore it a little bit more. Would we be able to get the community to support CCA? We knew that our community was very green, but would the community see the value in doing something like this to support the environmental and the sustainability goals of the city? And also, identifying those concerns, making sure that as residents voiced concerns or brought them to the table, that we were listening and that we were paying attention so that we could either mitigate those concerns or find an answer that was going to help them feel comfortable making a decision whether they move forward with the program or not. We also had a little bit of a piggybacking delay. In New York State contracts, there's a provision that allows you to piggyback on the agreement of another municipality as long as it states that that agreement can be piggybacked. We had initially thought we were going to hop onto a much larger aggregation with some other communities in Monroe County. However, when we got to the point where we were ready to move forward, the contract was still in corporation council in those municipalities, and they were nowhere near ready to move forward when we were. So we ultimately just made the decision to try and go out on our own and see what we could get done. And we ended up aggregating with the Village of Victor and have a really nice partnership there with Gateway Community that's worked seamlessly so far. About a year later, we passed Local Law 2019-003, which created and enabled the CCA program in our community. That was when the informal/formal community engagement really began. Over the course of the prior year, Richardson had come to several meetings and been an active partner in our process, but it was always under the honest that, we don't really care if you choose to work with Richardson. What we care about is that you choose CCA and that you choose to do this for your community, because ultimately that's what's important. So we felt comfortable having them be an educational partner because we knew that the place that they were coming from wasn't one of profit and their benefit. It was the benefit for the community and the benefit for the region. In February of 2020, we issued the official RFP for a third-party administrator, and we ultimately chose Jewel and Richardson for a couple different reasons. One, they had been just such a tremendous partner in the previous 18 months leading up to this decision, coming to meetings knowing that there was the potential for nothing to come out of it for them. But they were amazing, and we saw how hard they worked for our community when they owed us nothing and weren't even in an agreement with us yet. So we knew that they were going to continue that level of support and service if we did sign on with them. When we signed that agreement, we began the more formalized community outreach, and I know that you'll all see that date, March of 2020. Some crazy stuff happened and the world kind of shut down for a little bit. Within 2 weeks of City Hall being closed to the public, Richardson reached back out to us and told us how they had modified their community engagement campaign to make sure that we could continue to engage residents even if we couldn't meet in person. So, again, it's extremely important to pick the right partner, whoever you decide, because you're going to want somebody that's going to be willing to adjust and make the process work for you even when unforeseen obstacles come to the table. Next slide, please. So in August, we went to market for the first time. And we actually had to go to the market 3 times before we got an agreement that worked for us. The first time we went, as I mentioned earlier, the commodity was at an all-time low, and we could not get anybody to talk to us about signing even a 12-month fixed term because the cost was so low for electric that they didn't want to commit to anything moving forward. Second time we went out, we got back some just really confusing offers. They were more like, flexible rate mortgages, where it was boxes of hybrid situations for how you could pay things, and it was just way too complicated. We didn't want to manage that, and we didn't want to have to explain that to our residents, so we just chose to be patient. The third time we went back to market, we got a great rate, and we got a price point that was comfortable for us, that we felt really good about. It happens to be very similar to the price point that Brighton received, but from January 1st, 2021 to December 31st, 2022, any residents in the city of Canandaigua that have not opted out are paying essentially 4.29 cents per kilowatt hour for their electric on the supply side, which is tremendous. When you add that in with the delivery charges, it comes out to 9.5 cents per kilowatt hour, because as Shannon mentioned, those charges tend to fluctuate. And as more communities do this, utility companies are finding ways to adjust their fees to try and recoup some of the losses that they're seeing. So January 1st, CCA went live in our community, and there was no interruption of service. Everybody's lights went on. Most people didn't realize that there had been a change in their supplier until they opened their first electric bill and saw what Shannon outlined for us. So, overall, the process was pretty seamless in a lot of ways, but as Shannon also indicated, with any risk, there's going to be some challenges, and we definitely saw some of those as well. Next slide, please. So general community pushback. When we promoted this, I was expecting my phone to be ringing off the hook. I was expecting droves and droves of angry phone calls, droves of concerned citizens coming into my office in City Hall. We did have some, but not nearly on the scale that administration or the elected officials anticipated. In fact, we found that in a lot of cases it was pretty minimal, and it was coming from those same folks that seem to come to every meeting and have a concern about something on the agenda. Not to say that their concerns aren't equally as valid as anyone else's, they absolutely are, but we were seeing a lot of the same faces, and we weren't seeing people coming specifically concerned about community choice aggregation as something the city was potentially going to move forward with. One of the biggest challenges that we dealt with was misinformation. A lot of people fancy themselves experts in Google and can pull obscure facts out of any corner of the internet to justify what they're trying to prove. That was no different in this case as well. Some of the big misinformation points that we dealt with, number one, CCA impacts your delivery. That is absolutely 100% false. It is all the same delivery mechanism, regardless of whether or not you're on the standard default supply or another ESCO or a CCA agreement. It all comes through the same lines. It all comes through the same delivery system. So if anybody loses power, everybody's going to lose power. It's not a situation where the people on the default supply are going to have power, but the people on CCA are not. That's just not the case. Another thing that we heard pretty frequently is that it was going to impact the reliability of your service. That's also not true. It does not impact your current. It does not impact the reliability of your current. I can guarantee you and promise you that all of my appliances work just fine. And to the intended power capacity using CCA, we have had no issues with the inability to use any of the things in our home because we were dealing with an inconsistent current. So again, we're using the exact same delivery mechanism as everyone else. That's not going to be a concern. One that I hear that tends to frustrate me a little bit is that CCA does not have an impact. This is a meaningless exercise. You're not really going to be able to accomplish anything. You can't even secure 100% renewable energy from the grid. I completely disagree with all of that. A grid is a grid on purpose. It is sectioned off into smaller parts, and then you can choose the parts that you want to choose from the grid. In this case, CCA is choosing only to take parts from the grid that are 100% renewable. So that absolutely does have an impact. When you have an entire community or aggregation of communities or a region that is using electricity that is not generated through fossil fuels, you are having a massive impact on the GHGs that are being released into the air. You're impacting your air quality, potentially your water quality. So again, this is something that does have an impact. And as Shannon said, this is really something to make sure that your community is going to get behind. But if you're a community that genuinely cares about the environment and wants to be sustainable and promote, better practices for your residents, this is a good way to start. And lastly, you'll end up paying more. Again, electric's a commodity. It's going to fluctuate, but as Shannon indicated, the longer that we wait, knowing that we're going into the cold season and the cost for fuel and electricity is going to start to rise, the harder it's going to be for your community to get the kind of rate that is going to help potentially guarantee them the savings that you would hope you would achieve through this process. Another thing that we dealt with was what felt like a general lack of apathy or a lack of engagement. People don't really care about this. Is this really a big deal? Do they really support it that much? My municipal experience has shown me that probably 95% of the people in any community are really, really happy with the services that they're getting and that they're being provided. And that you don't have, a drove of people that's going to come to a public meeting and applaud the board or applaud staff for the fantastic work that they're doing day in and day out to provide high quality services. What you will get occasionally is somebody that comes that's frustrated. And you need to consider those concerns. You need to listen to every single resident and every single word. But just because you're not hearing support doesn't mean that it's not something that the community supports. And we actually found after the fact and talking to residents that, what we felt was a general lack of apathy or a general lack of engagement and apathy was support. They had seen that this change was coming. They'd read about it in things that had been mailed home. They had seen about it on Facebook. So they knew, and they just made a decision at that point whether or not they wanted to participate. And reaching everyone in the community. And this is one that I know that a lot of communities are concerned about as probably one of the primary risks. You need to do everything that you can to prepare your community for this change. And if there was one benefit from the city needing to go to market multiple times, it was that it gave us a much greater opportunity to engage with residents, to prepare them for the change, to give them the opportunity to opt out if they so chose. So, you need a long community engagement process for this to be a successful initiative. You also cannot force people to open their mail. You cannot force people to read the paper. You cannot force people to watch television or watch the news. Even after almost 15, 16 months of community engagement and education, the first week that CCA went live, I still had people calling my desk, screaming at me, asking me, who did I think I was? I'm violating their constitutional rights. I have no right to pick the supplier. They're going to call their attorney. And at that point, I kind of just had to sit back in my chair and say, sir, miss, I'm really sorry that you feel that way. I felt really good about the effort that was made to engage the community and let them know. There was over 8 mailings. It was the topic on a public meeting at least 7 or 8 times. It was on television. It was in the newspaper. It was on the radio. It was on podcasts. I mean, we really did everything short of going door to door to let everyone know that this change was coming. And we had to feel good about the effort that we made because I thought our effort was stupendous and that we really did turn over every rock to let everybody know that this change was coming. Next slide, please. So key takeaways and lessons learned through this process is a case study for the city of Canandaigua. Number one, the importance of the third-party administrator cannot be overstated. It's not a situation where you award a contract and you walk away and say, all right, go do your work. It's a constant conversation. It's a partnership. It's an engaged partnership where they are equally as concerned about the outcome as you are. So, making sure that you choose the right partner to work with you is critical. Also, the importance of the public engagement process cannot be overstated either. Public Service Commission only requires 90 days. And if you really want to make your residents frustrated, try implementing a change like this with a Public Service Commission minimum outreach campaign. That is where they might have a leg to stand on when they call and say things like, you did this without letting the community know. But, like I said, if after 15 months, we still had people that missed the memo, we had to feel good that we had done everything that we could to reach the entire community. Also, radio silence isn't a bad thing. As I said, most people are pretty happy. They'll happily pay their taxes because they love where they live and they love the services that they're provided. Just because you don't have people coming to meetings and asking for community choice aggregation per se, doesn't mean that it's not something that they support or not something that they're interested in exploring. What's nice about this program, and you know, it would be kind of a bummer, but if you can go all the way up to the point where you have contracts in front of you to sign. And if none of those agreements is good for you or your community doesn't feel comfortable, you can walk away with no obligation, no penalty, no commitment, no payment of any kind. So, you know, it really is about the choice that's right for your community, and you're not locked in once you start the process. So even if you get into exploring it and find out it's not something that is good for your community, you've at least explored it, and it's something that you can keep in your mind for a future option. Also, don't let minimal pushback and misinformation impede progress. You know, when you have 3 or 4 people coming to a meeting saying that this is a terrible idea, those people deserve to be listened to. But there are 3 or 4 people out of a community of 11,000. And in one case, in my situation, one of those guys didn't even live in our community. He happened to live in Brighton. So it didn't prevent him from coming to every city meeting and telling us how he felt about what we were doing, which is absolutely his right in participatory government. But, you know, if you're running into that, I also encourage community groups to go to public meetings as well, because they're taxpayers. And if this is something that they want, they should voice that opinion equally as clearly as the dissenters who are coming in and trying to impede what you're doing. Also be ready to handle misinformation. One of the first things that we did with Richardson was we came up with like a 1-pager of, you know, these are things that you might hear. This is what actually is the case. And it was a really helpful tool whenever we had residents that were concerned. You will still get calls, even with all the work that, you know, the third-party administrator does. But in my experience, most of them were people just calling to see, is this something that the city's actually doing? We don't want to get scammed. We see the city letterhead. You know, is this a program that the city's engaging in? And then it just gave me another opportunity to speak with a resident and let them know why we thought it was important to move forward with CCA. And at that point, if they wanted to stay in, they had the option. If they wanted to opt out, I would give them the dual Richardson number, and they would opt out within a matter of seconds. And lastly, the impact is very real. I think it's a strong statement when an entire municipality or an aggregation of municipalities comes together as a community and says, we want 100% renewable energy. We want our community to run as close to without a carbon footprint as possible. We want to eliminate fossil fuels from as many places as we possibly can. And when you have one community do that, it has a tremendous impact. But when you have bordering communities start to do it, and now there's tons of aggregations, there's more in process right now that Shannon alluded to. Now we start to take large chunks of our regional map, and those are all CCA communities. Please don't tell me that that's not going to have an impact on the air that we breathe and the greenhouse gases that get reduced, because that is a real impact. And this is one of the things that we can do as people to address some of the things that are concerns moving forward about our climate, is make better decisions, make more responsible decisions, and make responsible decisions that are going to be good for the world that we live in. Next slide, please. I am here to help. I don't know if you've been able to tell or not, I love talking about community choice aggregation. It is by far the favorite item that we have in the CCA program as far as I'm concerned, or the CEC program as far as I'm concerned. So if you have any questions, if you want your community to get started, if you want me to help you find resources, if you have any questions about CEC or CST at all, please don't hesitate to reach out. Jenny and I are here to help, and we're here to make sure that any community that wants to explore these options finds success. So with that, I will turn it over to Robin Wilt, and thank everyone for your time.
Hello, everyone. Can everybody hear me? Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. Sorry. So my name is Robin Wilt, and I am a town council member in the town of Brighton, which is in Monroe County. And I just want to thank the Genesee Finger Lakes Regional Planning Council and Jason and Rob for the invitation to attend today. I just wanted to offer my perspective as an elected official who has gone through this process. Rob happens to be our clean energy community coordinator, and as a member of the town board, that is the first municipality in Monroe County to obtain this 100% renewable electricity at a competitive price for its residents and the small businesses through our CCA aggregation, which was called Monroe Community Power. I am here to reaffirm our commitment to sustainability and the efficacy of CCA in achieving sustainable energy supply, and that helped earn the town of Brighton a designation as a bronze level climate smart community. In essence, I just want to assure everyone here to come on in. The water's really fine. Brighton launched its renewable energy program to provide their residents and small businesses with 100% renewable energy in January 1st, 2020, on January 1st, 2021. And our renewable energy supply is at a 24-month fixed rate that is lower than the current rates for the standard mix purchase in our utility, Rochester Gas and Electricity. Community choice aggregation, of course, allows New York municipalities to enact an enabling law to facilitate the purchase of electricity on behalf of its residents and small businesses. And Brighton passed that enabling law back in August 2018. So for us, the process was nowhere near the 90-day minimum. It was quite a lengthy one from passage to passage of the enabling law to implementation. And we held virtual and in-person public information meetings in the tens, I think, both before and after implementation. As I said, Brighton's default electric supply is 100% renewable energy, and its fixed rate is lower than eligible consumers have paid typically for the standard or non-renewable electricity supply in our region through RG&E. Brighton also worked in partnership with Jewel and Rocktricity. Jewel serves as the program administrator, and Rocktricity is our local program manager. We have been really pleased with the service that we've been provided by both those vendors. With community choice aggregation, we were able to leverage the collective buying power of our community's residents and small businesses at a large enough scale to dictate the terms of how they buy electricity. Brighton's default electric supply is a 100% hydro-based renewable electricity product. And as I said, that price point is lower than what our consumers were paying for a standard mix of nuclear, fossil, and renewable supply provided by RG&E over a 24-month period. CCA, of course, is promoted by NYSERDA and as a priority climate action. And these programs have cut costs for consumers and provide stronger consumer protection. Brighton is part of Monroe Community Power, and of course, we are under the oversight of the New York State Public Service Commission, just like all of the programs. So our current RG&E rate at the time of implementation was about 4.6 cents per kilowatt hour, and the average monthly weighted variable rate for RG&E was 4.299 cents per kilowatt hours. And with our renewable product from Source Power, we were able to implement at a rate of 4.292 cents per kilowatt hour. So it wasn't a huge amount of savings, but in terms of environmental impact for our community, that really was the deciding factor. The program that we implemented was the result of months-long competitive procurement process. We didn't go out to bid 3 times, but we did go out to bid twice. Brighton selected Source Power as their default supplier because they offered us a unique combination of 100% renewable power, competitive pricing, and that consumer protection for a 24-month lock-in period. In the first round, we just didn't receive the pricing that we thought presented enough of a value to proceed. But no harm, no foul. The second round yielded us very favorable pricing through which we were able to then realize a savings for our residents and small businesses. Brighton's program also offered opt-up community solar through Source Power. And for those who want to further support locally sourced clean energy and lower their annual electricity costs even more, this was a great option. We basically, by subscribing to a local solar farm, electricity customers were guaranteed to save up to an additional 10% annually, which was really compelling for consumers. So the guaranteed savings is essentially received in the form of utility bill credits. My utility bill is about 4.07 cents per kilowatt hour as somebody who has opted into our community solar program. And unlike with our CCA, those who wanted to participate in the community solar had to proactively enroll. It was open to most RG&E residential and small business customers, regardless whether they participated in the CCA. But by participating in both the CCA and community solar program, people were able to benefit from both the CCA's lower fixed energy supply rates and guaranteed savings for the solar generation. In addition, subscriptions to the community solar program provided our town with revenue that was accrued into a sustainability fund. And our town has thus far had over 1,000 enrollments. Our community solar program was extremely popular, and we've raised in excess of $65,000 from community solar subscriptions, which we can now use towards local sustainability projects. And so due to the success of our opt-up enrollments in community solar, this past August, our town board passed the enabling resolution for opt-out community solar for Brighton. And we intend to hopefully have that implemented by mid-year in 2022. So obviously there have been substantive climate and sustainability goals that we've been able to achieve through the implementation of our CCA, but we've also realized true value for our residents as well. It really has been a win-win for our municipality, and I'm just here to say that other municipalities should jump in with both feet. It really is a game changer in terms of the service that you can provide to your residents. That's all I have.
Thanks, Robin. As I've said before, before we started today, thank you so much for participating today. Your perspective as an elected official is just incredibly valuable. I'm going to turn it over to Rob if he has any final words. Rob and I are both in the same office today, so we probably shouldn't talk at the same time because we'll probably get an echo effect. But Rob, anything you wanted to add at this point? And of course, anybody out there, if you have questions, put them in the chat room at this point.
I guess I would first wait to see if we have anybody that has any questions, because I'd be happy to answer those. Other than that, I really want to thank Shannon and Robin for their time and being part of this. I think, being able to tell a well-rounded story with as many different perspectives as possible makes these a much more meaningful and powerful experience. So having you guys both here today was fantastic. And thank you very much for your time and your effort.
Thanks for having me, us.
Thanks for having us, Rob.
I'm not seeing any questions. However, if anyone does have questions after the fact, please feel free to reach out to Jenny and I, or to Shannon if you have more specific CCA questions. We're definitely here to help and do anything that we can to help your municipalities move forward and find success in these programs.